Oh,
All
okay.
right. Oh, here we go. All right.
All right.
Hi, Markeisha.
Hi.
Okay, so for the start of this, just give me a little bit about your education background, what got you or what motivated you to get into special education, the position you held, and the school that you have worked at, and how many years.
Okay. And before I start, can you see me?
I can't, your picture went away.
Okay. Yeah, I got a message saying to close my other browsers or something. Okay, there we
Oh,
are.
okay.
All
All right,
right.
I can see you now. So,
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can you ask the question again?
yeah, so just give some background information. You can say your whole name, the position that you had, what school district or school affiliation that you were a part of, the number of years you were a part of education, special education, and just your experience, your educational experience as well.
Yeah. So, my name is Markeisha Peace. I have been an educator for 7 years now. I actually did not start my career in special education. I started in general education as a fourth grade teacher. And one thing I realized very quickly is that I naturally gravitated toward students who needed extra support, whether it be behavioral, emotional. I got my bachelor's degree in early childhood and special ed and got my master's degree in trauma informed education. And even before I got my master's degree, when I first started my educational career 7 years ago, as I mentioned, the students, first of all, I worked in an inner city school. I worked in Harrisburg School District, which is the district I grew up in.
Okay.
So, uh, unfortunately, there unfortunately but fortunately, the students that we service in Harrisburg are all very underprivileged, come from a very strong trauma background, things of that sort. So even though they may have been learning in a setting that was identified as general education,
Yeah.
a lot of the students could have very much benefited from emotional support, which I know falls under special education.
Right.
So over time, what helped me to move from gen ed to special ed is that I noticed that teaching content wasn't what pulled at my heartstrings. Yes, I
Mm-hmm.
love teaching math and ELA and making it fun for the kids, but what
Mm-hmm.
I really loved is working with a specific group of students, those students that were often misunderstood, overlooked, or overall struggling to believe in themselves. And I know education has a wide range of um, different types of students that are serviced. Most
Mm-hmm.
recently for my career, I worked at New Story Schools
Mm-hmm.
as a emotional support teacher, specifically for fifth and sixth graders.
Okay.
So even though the primary students that I served benefited from emotional support, I also serviced students that had an autism diagnosis but were very high functioning.
Okay.
And New Story in particular is a private school that
Mm-hmm.
services students that benefit from very intensive, restrictive supports. Some of them had to have been hands on. We were crisis trained and things of that sort, especially if the students were becoming a harm to themselves or to other people.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that was
Okay.
perfect. That was awesome. And I love like what your motivation behind the switch to special education, like full time, like
Mhm.
those students who were misunderstood or were kind of falling through the cracks. Like I relate with you in that. Like that is a
Mhm.
motivation behind like why it is that I want to get into the field of school psychology. So
Absolutely.
I love that about you.
Well, thank you. And I can I just add one more thing to
Absolutely.
that. So something else when I moved or switched from general education to special education is when I was working with Harrisburg School District, one of the main reasons I chose to leave is because not because of the students, but because of the lack of services for the
Mm,
students. As I mentioned, I believe that all of the population that we served could have benefited from emotional support. However, there was a cap on the classroom sizes and things of that sort. So they
yeah.
tried to take the students who needed it the most, even though in my opinion everybody needed it.
Yeah.
So one thing that I found as a major blessing when I transitioned to special ed and started working at New Story is that the classroom sizes being smaller, the
Hmm.
main focus and priority being the students' mental health, their emotional health before academics. Yes, it
Yeah.
was great to help them thrive and succeed at their IEP. Academic goals were a part of
Mhm.
it. However, the main reason was if the students are not okay mentally, they're
Mhm.
the focus wasn't, oh, let's just shove academics down their throat. So that's one
Right.
thing I genuinely appreciate about special ed versus general education is that I believe that more needs are met. And as I
Mhm.
mentioned before, the students that are misunderstood or overlooked, I believe that special education is an amazing place and world,
Mhm.
if that's a good word for it, to
Yeah.
really meet the needs of those students.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. All right. So you kind of really answered the next question of why you became a special education teacher. So thank you for that. Could you describe to me what a typical workday looked like for you?
Absolutely. I can start with saying that no 2 days were the same.
Mhm. Are they
Even
ever?
no, and it's the word of special education. I know that it keeps you on your toes.
Mhm.
And one thing I learned is that you have to go in being willing to accept change, no matter how sudden it comes, no matter how often it comes. And that's honestly what I loved most. Every day was unpredictable. And yes, there was still that structure. Yes, I could still do what I loved most, which is teach. But
Mhm.
because it wasn't that same monotonous routine of
Mhm.
go to work, this is our schedule, and things like that, I thrived off of that because it
Yeah.
helped me to make sure my cup was filled up so that way I can pour into the other students. So the mornings usually started with greeting my students, checking in on how they were feeling.
Okay.
I am a sucker for morning meetings. I
Mhm.
know that is something that is often taught in education courses in college, and even a lot of teachers do professional development on the
Mhm.
importance of morning meeting, but unfortunately it's not always prioritized.
Right.
I
Kind of
whether
like a
what
check off the list. Okay, we
Abs
did it.
absolutely, and there are some teachers that did it to check off that box, but for
Mhm.
me, I was locked in. I was
Yeah.
all in. I Every single morning, my students knew, okay, once this timer went off, we come to the carpet. The morning meetings consisted of a greeting, a
Mhm.
sharing, some type of activity, and a lot of what we talked about was trauma informed because that's the foundation of who I am as a person, even before I had that as my master's.
Mhm.
So, as I mentioned, we started the day with making sure that they were regulated
Mhm.
before the academic piece began. And then throughout the day, there were core subjects that were taught with the implementation of behavioral support plans, different data that was collected, and then also collaborating with a lot of other specialists as well, whether it be therapists, whether it be other support staff, just to make sure that the students were getting the full supports that they needed. And another thing I really loved about New Story is that every classroom was assigned what was called an academic and behavioral support staff.
Mhm. Okay.
And that to me was one of the best parts of the program at New Story because it's like my main goal was, or my main job, I guess I can say, part of my job
Mhm.
description was teaching academics.
Mhm.
However, if the behavioral piece was overpowering that,
Yeah.
I would work toward making sure that fires were put out, but
Mhm.
then the
Had that
ABSS,
level of support.
yeah, the ABSS ensured that they were there. Plus, we do walkie calls and as many support staff come
Mhm.
as needed, so that way I can make sure that the other students are still getting, their education. And
Okay.
then my day also consisted of communicating with families, helping
Mhm.
students to navigate their emotional or behavioral challenges. And one thing I can say, some days went exactly as planned. Some
Yeah.
days those lesson plans got followed to a T. Other days the lesson plans went out the window and it's like,
Mhm.
oh, we're on survival mode. Let's spend 30 minutes of our day doing yoga or mindfulness
Yeah.
breathing because there was just so many fires to put
Mhm.
out. And my big thing as an educator is safety first, and not
Right.
just physical safety but emotional safety. Do they
Wow.
feel welcome? Do they feel supported? Do they feel loved? And making sure that I was okay with accommodating to what they needed as well as what I needed and other staff, so that way I can be able to uh, change course if needed based off of what the students need.
Wow. That's awesome. That's
Thank
really
you.
cool. Yeah. So you mentioned that like no day was the same and sometimes you would have to put out fires. What
Mhm.
going off of that and say more about that too, like what was the hardest part of your job and like what contributed
Mm.
to that and why?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question.
Hmm.
I it's always great to talk about the rainbows and the butterflies,
Yeah.
but we grow in discomfort and things like that. So I believe overall the hardest part of my job was knowing that many of the students were carrying burdens that
Hmm.
were far beyond the classroom. Some burdens that I was aware of because of getting their IEP and maybe it was listed. Some students after they broke out of their shell because they realized it was a safe space to be themselves, we we learned about different burdens that they were carrying, but the reality is many of the students had experienced trauma, mental health challenges, coming from unstable home environments, and just may have previous academic trauma as well, may have had many unsuccessful years in school where whether it was a teacher or other students that just didn't see the potential in them. So
Hmm.
the emotional stress that came along with the job was hard because I'm a major empath, and
Hmm.
I oftentimes put on that cape and wish that I can save everyone, and I have to remember that one, that's not my job to save everybody or to save anybody really. I don't, as an educator, my job is to instill great things into the students, but not ultimately save them, if you will.
Yeah.
Um, so, but I also had to remember to celebrate the small victories and also recognize that meaningful growth often took time. There were some students that started the year and they were very, it was very difficult to help them to be their full selves because they had so many walls up because
Hmm.
of lack of trust, or it's just just realizing and remembering and humbling myself to know that every single morning when I walk into the school, leave the problems of yesterday and yesterday. If I had a bad day yesterday where a student was non-compliant or was disrespectful or there were no academic successes that day, guess what?
Hmm.
That was yesterday. Take
Yeah.
that and use it today and as a means to find the small victories and start each day new with, hey, I'm happy you're here today. Hey, I love you. Today's going to be a great day. So long story short, I guess, but really short story long. The hardest part of the job, as I mentioned, is remembering that a lot of my students were carrying things, some that they spoke about, some that they didn't know about, some
Hmm.
struggles that you would never even wish on your worst enemy,
Yeah.
especially with the age that they are. But just
Right.
remembering that they were put in my life for a reason and using the gift that was given to me to really pour into them.
Oh, I love that. That's awesome. I have no words to that. That's I mean, you're so right. Like kids are carrying so many different things that
Mhm.
are way different than what we carried when we were their age and or what we might
Absolutely.
carry now as adults that these kids are already experiencing at a young age. So
Mhm.
yeah, that's so true. That is definitely seen a lot. What was the most rewarding part of your job and why?
Oh my gosh, there's so many things. If I could summarize all of the things that I believe are rewarding,
Yeah.
it would definitely be watching my students begin to believe in themselves.
Mm,
So,
wow.
as an educator, we spend so much time pouring into our students, telling them how capable they are, reminding them of their worth, but the instant that it turns from, oh, their belief is not just what they're hearing me or other adults or even other kids say, but when you
Yeah.
hear a child say, oh, I can do this, I am
Yeah.
capable, I am smart, I have made progress, that to
Mm,
me has been the most rewarding part of being an educator, especially in special education, where, as I mentioned in the beginning, we service so many students that can be overlooked, or there can be that stigma of, oh, they're in special ed, they're not smart, or they have limited possibilities. So,
Right.
and I realized that sometimes the biggest victories aren't actually academic at all, although yes, it's great when they struggle to subtract with zeros and then all of a
Yeah.
sudden they've mastered that goal. That's always a reason to celebrate. But
Hmm.
the biggest rewards were times where students were asking for help instead of shutting down,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
were I saw them using their coping skills, taking deep breaths, asking if they can go for a walk instead of throwing a desk or yelling out a curse word.
Hmm.
Moments where I saw students that may have began the year as extremely verbally aggressive to then encouraging their peers to use the strategies that they've learned,
Yeah.
and them just knowing within themselves, even if they couldn't put the words together and say, oh, I made it this far, and Miss, a news story, we were on first name basis, so, oh, Miss Markeisha helped me with, like, forget all of that. Yes, I can give myself credit, whoop whoop, for all your hard
Yeah.
work, but when they can see in themselves,
Right.
seeing their confidence grow, always reminded me why the work matters so much.
Yeah.
And that was the biggest reward that was greater and more impactful than all the hard days, all the stressful days, all the you talk. Remember when we just talked about the hardest part of the job? When
Hmm.
I can take all of those rewards, well, the main reward out of all
Yeah.
of them, but then it overpowers all the hard days.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Seeing their confidence grow and watching them believe in themselves. I love that.
Hmm.
Love that. Did you have, I mean, you mentioned that you worked in News Story, which is a emotional support.
Hmm.
It can be also autistic support
Yeah,
focused school. Did you have, I'm sure you had students with behavioral challenges, like you mentioned. Um, how did you specifically deal with students that displayed like more consistent behavioral challenges?
yeah. That's a great question. And as you mentioned, yes, absolutely. At New Story, excuse me, I work with students who had significant
Mm-hmm.
emotional, behavioral needs.
Mm-hmm.
And that every morning when I walked in, that was my primary focus.
Mm-hmm.
And as I mentioned earlier, academics came second to that.
Right.
And I would say the biggest lesson I learned while working at New Story is that behavior is a form of communication. And that's something that I learned in undergrad, that I've learned as an adult, is that whether they're a child or someone our age, when someone is having a certain behavior, especially when it's repetitive, it's consistent, it's
Mm-hmm.
expected,
Yeah.
um, they're communicating something. So I changed the way my brain works, and instead of asking a student or even asking myself what's wrong, or what's wrong
Yeah.
with the student, reframing the question to what happened. And that also created that safe space for a student to feel like, oh, this is a place where I'm heard and I'm understood. And I also took a lot of time to reflect and think, well, what is this behavior, what do I believe this behavior is, what do I believe the behavior is trying to communicate to me, what do I
Mm-hmm.
believe the student is specifically communicating. And I remembered students become who they hang around. If they, yes, it was stressful. And there were times where I wanted to explode or raise my voice. But
Yeah.
I did a lot of those self checks that I always
Mm-hmm.
teach my students. And I realized if I want them to grow positively, emotionally, behaviorally, and for their significant behavioral challenges to lessen,
Yeah.
then I can't, for a better lack of words, can't be spazzing out and, being
Yeah.
reactive. I have to exemplify the behaviors that I want them to then portray.
Mm-hmm.
So that involved, when I was frustrated, trying my best to stay calm, but also communicating, hey guys, I'm frustrated right now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to take some deep breaths. So that way they can realize that, hey, I might have wanted I might have wanted to throw a chair across the room as well,
Sure.
but I know that I am bigger than that. And then also
Mhm.
reminding them that you take that steering wheel, you
Mhm.
control your emotions. Your emotions
Mhm.
cannot control you. I did a
Right.
lot of like positive affirmations in my classroom and de-escalation strategies and really focused on helping the students that had those significant behaviors and those repetitive behavioral challenges,
Mhm.
instead of just looking at it like, oh, I'm punishing you,
Mm.
helping them to regulate and reframe it as, oh, you just threw a desk or you just cursed someone out after they
Mhm.
got the supports that they needed outside of what I could offer at the time because of
Mhm.
teaching. Come back in and let's talk about what happened.
Right.
How are you feeling before this happened? What happened because of it? Did other people get hurt because of your words or your actions? And what can we do to proactively handle the situation differently? So, a lot of conversation that
Okay.
really, I believe, helped with those significant behavior challenges.
Yeah, and I like how you said that, like you do your own self checks, because then that shows the students like what using those coping skills look like,
Mhm.
practicing it, and how they can actually help you in real time. Um,
Absolutely.
what did or how did you deal with behavioral challenges when you were in general education?
Mm. Honestly, I I mean, yes, working at News Story, I had trainings that were helping to prepare me in a different
Mhm.
way than it was when I worked in general education. I
Yeah.
can say though that approaching things with a trauma informed lens and
Hmm.
those positive affirmations and really getting to the root of the behavior has always been a part of my behavior management as an educator. I can say though that when I did work in general education, overall, general education is designed for the typical learner.
Hmm.
First off, I want to say I can't believe it's 2026 and they still say regular education because, in my opinion, that implies that students that receive special education services are not regular.
Right.
And the reality is, even students that are in regular education can still experience dysregulation. But that's a
Mhm.
story for another time.
Yeah.
So,
Speak on it though.
so
That's a very good point.
absolutely. So, as I mentioned, general ed is designed for the typical learner, maybe someone who
Mhm.
doesn't struggle with as many behavioral challenges or emotional challenges.
Yeah.
And special education is very individualized.
Hmm.
So, as a special education teacher, I wasn't only responsible for teaching them academics, I was also responsible for modifying the instruction I was given, writing and implementing their individualized education plans and programs, collecting data, things of that sort. So, I would say that is the biggest difference between general education and special education is
Yeah.
all of the background work that is done in special ed to ensure that you are giving these students the best education possible.
Hmm.
Whereas in general education, I did lesson plans, but it was a personal choice
Okay.
to do behavioral plans. Like that wasn't something that was necessarily a part of my job description or requirements,
Hmm. That was just
even though
something
they're
that you were versed in, that you knew could be helpful to your students.
absolutely. And as I mentioned, considering that my career started in a school district that I believe was very similar to New Story in a lot of ways, just unfortunately without the supports in place.
Yeah.
I believe that I had to equip myself very early on in my career to prioritizing behavioral supports outside of academic supports. But
Got
overall, like if there was a student that was thriving academically, behaviorally when I was in general education, as I mentioned, the background work was
Mhm.
not as intense
Gotcha.
when it came to general education versus special education. It special education, in my opinion, requires many different hats. I mean, a teacher, period, no matter
For sure.
gen ed or special ed,
Yeah.
requires wearing many different hats. But in special education, it's not just equipping your students, but equipping yourself to be prepared for the many changes that may happen daily.
Gotcha. Sorry, I'm writing my notes here.
No,
Yeah,
you're good.
that's a really that now that you like describe that, that really does make sense. Like even going through general education as myself as a student and then like now working in special education,
Hmm.
definitely see that it is more individualized, it is more unique to each student, and then you wear a ton of different hats and you have to
Absolutely.
switch, you have to change them immediately
Yeah.
to adapt to whatever is going on. So I'm
Yeah.
glad that you really highlighted that. That's awesome. um what advice could you give to a graduate student interested in a career with individuals with disabilities?
I definitely say to go into the field with two things: humility and also curiosity. I think it's very important to remain humble and to go in with an open mind, an open heart, and knowing that in a special education environment where you're serving individuals with disabilities may not be expected, but it also might exceed your expectations as a person who has a heart for working with people who are different than you, that learn different, that
Yeah.
handle situations differently. And I also think because every student is different, just like we can think about it as us as adults, there's no adult that is the same, even if someone is a twin.
Mhm.
Um, it's important to avoid assuming that one strategy that works for one individual will work for the other. I also believe that building relationships and rapport is important. I hear a lot in the world of education, relationships over rigor, and I believe that is 110% effective when we enter these fields, especially with serving students that are, as I mentioned earlier, coming back to those same words, misunderstood and underprivileged. It's important to know that we need to focus on the relationships before focusing on compliance. And also remember to not be afraid to make mistakes. And that's one thing that I believe that I exceeded at as an educator, is that when I made a mistake, whether it was I solved a academic problem and then thought I got the right answer, but realized it was wrong. Not
Mhm.
only acknowledging to my students, hey, I made a mistake, but if it was something that deserved an apology, let's say I raised my voice or, said something that may have been insincere, showing them that I'm a human as well. So that way that safe space can be created for them. And also lean in on experienced teachers, experienced staff. Don't be afraid to ask questions, and also remember to embrace every support that's available.
Mm.
And even though um, a graduate student and any individual working with a person with disabilities carries their own strengths, just remembering, like I talked about, that humility
Mhm.
of, yes, you can thrive in your strengths and feel confident in that, but also don't be afraid to be like, oh, these are things that I don't know that well.
Yeah.
I need to have an open mind so that way I can learn from people and offer the same grace to yourself that you would offer to the individuals that you work with.
Wow. You're awesome.
Thank you. So are
You're awesome.
you.
Thank you. Offer the same grace you would offer to others, to yourself. I love that. That's a motto I try to live by.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Next question. Describe an especially challenging situation involving a student's family and how was that resolved?
Hmm. Excuse me. So I had a situation where a parent frequently used their child's disability to
Mm,
lower the expectations for their child.
okay.
And it was hard to often communicate that that was happening because you don't want to tell someone how to parent, or you don't want to come off as someone who seems like they know more about their child than they do. But I did realize that they were often using their child's disability as like just given their child limits.
Mm-hmm.
And I completely respected the parent's perspective. I also, as an educator, knew the student's potential academically, behaviorally. So the student in particular struggled a lot with emotional regulation and behaviors while in school. And as I mentioned, his mom often viewed his behavior as, oh, he just can't control himself because of his diagnosis. He not
Mm-hmm.
only was he in an emotional support classroom because of his emotional challenges, but he was also diagnosed with autism.
Okay.
So while I completely understood where mom was coming from, um, I communicated because she wanted to set up a meeting with the school counselor and the principal. Well, they're not called principals at New Story, but the admin of the school. And I shared examples of what the student is capable of and how I believe that the behavioral challenges are communication of certain things and not necessarily a result of his autism, because he's very much aware of what he's doing. And it wasn't necessarily about disagreeing with mom,
Mm-hmm.
but it was about helping mom to understand that her child is more capable than what she was seeing. So it was very challenging in that meeting, to the point where mom got verbally aggressive and believed that I wasn't doing my job as the son's or teacher. And overall, I can say the situation taught me that advocating for students sometimes also means, you know, advocating for yourself and partnering with families through those difficult conversations. So it was a challenging time for sure, but I wasn't letting down, or I was respectfully disagreeing with the parent while also speaking, as I mentioned, about her son's capabilities and the expectations without what's the word I'm trying to say? I can't think of the word that I'm trying to say right now, but yeah, so it was challenging for sure, as I mentioned, disagreeing with the parent, but I had to see it from an educator's perspective of seeing, like, speaking about what I see in the classroom 40, however many hours, 37 and a half hours a week versus
Yeah.
what she's doing at home.
Right, right. And that brings up a good point too, with like, even though he had this has this diagnosis, it brings up like how labels can almost limit what people can see in children.
Yeah.
And it's great that you were able to, acknowledge that despite him having these different abilities,
Mhm.
he still was able to show, strengths in other areas.
Yeah.
Um, so I can only imagine how difficult that must have been to try and communicate, because you don't want to overstep and
Absolutely not. Yeah.
like try to tell a parent like your kid needs to do this, or like, like, and it can be
Mhm.
so tricky because like you're there to present the progress and even sometimes give advice to family,
Yeah.
hey, to keep this consistent, like here's some things you could do at home, and like you try to give like respectful and polite suggestion, but like not every parent will take it well.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
thank you for sharing that. That definitely must have been really difficult, um especially in that time. If you said and you said that the parent got like verbally aggressive too.
Mhm.
Oh man.
Yeah, to the point where she was screaming at me to get out of the room.
Wow.
Um, and what was also unfortunate as well is that my boss did not advocate for me. So that was a time where I was not only advocating for my student, but
Yeah,
also advocating for myself. So, yeah.
that's really unfortunate. What's the one thing that surprised you the most about special education and why?
Hmm. I would say being surprised about how relationship centered
Mm,
the job is and was as a special educator. So, as I mentioned, before becoming a special education teacher,
mm-hmm,
I I knew of special education because it was a part of my bachelor's degree. I
mm-hmm,
worked in a general education setting where there was pushing and different things like that with students who had this or who have disabilities. So I was exposed to special education, but I didn't actually experience being a special education teacher until when I worked at New Story.
okay,
So the relationship piece and the accommodations in specialized instruction was something that surprised me, but not in a bad way. It
okay,
surprised me in a great way. And it's like, wow, I wish that the advocacy was this strong in general education,
mm-hmm,
especially because if a student doesn't have a diagnosis, however they have significant challenges,
mm-hmm,
oftentimes they're overlooked and don't receive the supports that they need.
mm-hmm,
Like I know, for example, when I was a general education teacher, I had a student in particular who has an autism diagnosis and was very low functioning, had a lot of the behavioral challenges of an autism diagnosis, including um, like eating random things. And because she was in a general education class and the
mm-hmm,
special education classrooms in my school at the time were all filled up,
okay,
she often did not receive the supports that she needed. Whereas in special education and as a special educator, the supports there were absolutely amazing. And I believe that students are much more willing to learn when they know that they're safe, when they know they're respected and genuinely cared for across all boards, whether special education or general education. But what really surprised me the most is about special ed is how as I mentioned, how relationship centered and relationship focused it is.
awesome. All right, last bit of questions. What's one thing that frustrates you the most about special education and why?
So I kind of touched on this a little bit already.
You did,
One
yeah.
thing that frustrates me for sure is that there are people that underestimate students simply
Mm-hmm.
because they have a disability. And a lot of times the labels can unintentionally lower the expectations of the students.
Mm,
And I believe that every student deserves a chance at being successful and the opportunity to show what they're capable of, obviously with the right supports.
right.
So one of the most frustrating things about special education is that, as I mentioned, even though, especially when I worked at News Story versus special education, that it wasn't the typical elementary school that had special education classes as support. One of the biggest things that frustrated me was, as I mentioned, people lowering expectations, seeing the disability as a limit.
Mm,
And one thing I learned and I'm grateful for is what I learned in my undergrad program is that person first language is important.
yeah.
And for example, instead of just saying he is autistic, reframe it as he has autism so that
Mm,
way we're not putting his diagnosis as the label
right.
to then limit what that student is capable of.
Right. Yeah, that's so important. So important. Acknowledging the person before what's part of
Mhm.
them. And
Yeah.
like you said, every student has a strength, something that they're good at. So
Yes.
acknowledging, yes, they have these things that they might need extra support or,
Mhm.
done differently, but they also are good at X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And they have these great qualities of them and things like that. That's awesome. Share a student success story.
So I, when I worked at New Story, my class size of when my class maxed out was 12 students.
Okay.
And I got my 12th and final student in March, and the school year ends in June. So it was close to the end of the school year.
Right.
And the student that I got was actually my one and only girl. So I had 11 boys and she was the
Ooh.
only girl. And she was transferred to New Story due to her extreme um, aggressive behaviors, both physical and verbal. And when she first started at New Story, it was evident why she was there. You know, she was cursing people out left and right,
Mm-hmm.
threatening to hurt people and fight people. But what's beautiful is for her short time at New Story,
Mm-hmm.
I watched her blossom significantly,
Yeah.
behaviorally, emotionally, and I I love that. She didn't just learn how to manage her emotions during
Mm-hmm.
her short time there. She became the kind of student who helped other students manage their emotions as well.
That's
I
wow.
remember during the like the second to last week of school, I believe it was, there was a student that was upset about something and kicking the desk, and you can tell that the student was starting to get escalated. But
Mm-hmm.
the student, my student, who's a girl who started, she looked across the classroom and said, "Hey, you're okay. Let's take some deep breaths. You're going to get through this." And just seeing that progress, like I told you I'm an empath. Like I cry
Yeah.
all the time. So my eyes started watering, and I
I
had
would
an
have also
interaction
done
with
that.
this particular student,
Yeah.
and we got really close, and I expressed to her all the time how proud of her I was,
Wow.
because you know she's one of those students that walked in with so much, has been through a lot of trauma. She has a lot of younger siblings and mom's out of the house a lot, so she takes on the responsibility of playing mom and things like that. So
Wow.
I was like, you know, you can take those walls down. And I started to see, like, brick by brick, her walls coming down when it came to the end of the school year. So the success story is that I watched her growth
Mm-hmm.
become a part of who she was. And it wasn't just something that she was practicing, it was something that she was becoming.
Wow. That I would have been crying at that point as well.
Yeah.
Wow, that's I mean, that's what we do it for, you know?
Yeah.
Like them seeing it for themselves and
Mhm.
like seeing it in motion. I'm about to
Yeah.
start crying now because that's amazing. Wow. Last and final question. What would you say is special about special education?
Everything. Yeah, close the book.
Right.
Um, but I believe what makes special education special is the individualized care.
Mm,
And when I think about my own personal journey growing up in school, I was never a student that was in a special ed program or did special education classes, but thinking about my needs as a student and how I wanted to be seen for my strengths and not my struggles. And I wanted to be heard and understood. And I wanted my teachers to have high expectations so I can work hard and meet them and reach them.
yeah.
That's what I love about special education, is that that individualization is real. It's existent and it's transformative in my opinion. I
Yeah.
believe that every student deserves to be seen as a person before their diagnosis, just like I mentioned earlier. And special education recognizes that one size fits all learning does not work for
Mm,
everybody.
right.
And it allows educators to adapt, to
Mm,
advocate, and to create different opportunities for their students to succeed in ways that honor their strengths and
mm,
honor their needs. And special education is special because it's about giving every single child access to the education and support that they deserve.
wow. Like a star. A star. Wow. That was that was great. Cause I mean, that's how I would see it. And I hope that's how, everybody who's in the field, people who are
Yeah.
in the field see it. Like giving every student a chance.
Hmm.
Wow. Let me write that down.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, and as I mentioned, giving every excuse me, a student, giving every student a chance is what makes education special as a whole,
Mhm.
but special education is special
Mhm.
because of the fact that the individualization is technically it's a part of the law. Like,
Mhm.
as
Yeah.
in special education, you got to have IEPs. You got to be able to give these supports to students. So, if anything, if it's not going to be a norm in general education, that's what I love about special education. It has to be the norm
Right.
to be
It's
able
mandated
to
to give every student a chance.
that.
Well, yeah, that part. That part. Awesome. Well, thank you so, so much, Markeisha.
Of course. Thank you
You're
for
phenomenal.
I appreciate
You're
that.
phenomenal. And every student that you had will have encounter, they have got a great teacher.
Thank you so
Honestly.
much. I
They
appreciate that.
really do. Yeah,
Yeah.
of course.
And I wish you so much success in your journey, and I'm here to
Thank
support in any and every way.
I appreciate it so
Yeah.
very much. So
Yeah.
very much. Thank you.
Of course.